Hi, my name is Jason, and when I was 10 years old, I had a stepbrother who I hadn't talked to in years, but I'm sure he wouldn't want his name out there, so I'm just gonna call him Brad. Me and Brad used to walk around where I lived and just mess around doing random things. At this time in my life, I was introduced to drugs and alcohol. I would say I was a troublemaker at the time. I would do stupid things like break into abandoned buildings and things of that sort. One day I had the idea to walk to the downtown area with Brad. My dad and stepmother were out on a date, so we took our opportunity to leave. From where I lived, it was about a 45-minute walk to get to the downtown area. We began our walk through the ghetto area that we lived in at the time, talking about the things we were going to do that day. A couple of options came to us, and we discussed them. We thought we could eat or go to an arcade with the little money we had. We finished our walk and we made it to the dollar store, where we bought some snacks with the little money we had. We continued to walk eating our snacks until we found this abandoned looking building. I say looking building for a reason that'll make sense here in a second. We broke into this door by using a pocket knife that we had on us. Once we got into this building, there was the small room with a desk and cupboard in the corner of the room. We began to look through the things, and we opened one of the drawers, and we found a gun, which then gave us the "it's time to leave" feeling. We walked back outside and began walking down an alleyway beside this building where a man was standing at, and he was tall with a deep voice. He asked me and Brad why we were just in that building, which scared us. How could he have known we were in there? He told us to sit and wait, and that the owner of the building has to ask us a few questions. We were waiting for a little bit, which was a big mistake that I really wish we could take back. We then heard the sounds of tires squeaking against the pavement, and an SUV stopped in front of the alleyway. The man from earlier jumped out of the vehicle and began running towards us. He immediately bolted towards the other side of the alleyway, which, after a left turn, was the sidewalk beside some building. We then kept running, and a few seconds after we left the alley, the SUV came from around the corner, still chasing us. We ran through a few more alleys and through our city park before we finally lost them. Once we did, we made our way back home, still running. Once we got home, I got through the front door, and I just fell to the floor, and all I could do next was just cry. To this day, I have never told my parents, but I really can't imagine what those people would have done to us if they had caught us.
I was attending a popular concert in the south side of Chicago last year. As most of you probably know, it's a pretty sketchy area down there, and the crime rate is really high. But the tickets were really cheap and the concert was well populated, so I felt pretty safe. Plus, I decided to go with a couple of my friends. The concert was great and we all really enjoyed ourselves, but we knew the drive out would be pretty bad with all the traffic. It was almost 10 p.m. by the time we got out of the parking lot and onto the main road. We realized pretty quick, though, that we were going to be on this road for a while, as the cars were barely even moving forward. Sitting there, my friends started to look up other routes to get back to our town, and they found one that could hopefully get us past all this traffic. After sitting in basically the same spot for 30 minutes, we agreed we would try the other route. We turned off the main road as soon as we could and began going through neighborhood streets. Surprisingly, there were a lot of people outside this late at night, just walking around or standing in their yards. This wasn't normal from where we lived, which was just a couple hours west. As we continued down these neighborhood streets, we began to notice that the people outside would watch us as we drove by. And then we also started to realize that we hadn't seen any other cars in probably 20 minutes. This got us a little bit nervous, and we all started to pay more attention. I asked one of my friends to check where the nearest main road was, and as he was scrolling through the map, my other friend pointed out a car at the end of the street that we were on, It was parked sideways, blocking both lanes of the road. I stopped the car immediately and backed out and got onto the road that we were on previously, then continued down there. We began to panic a little bit, trying to find a safe way out to a more public area with other cars. But just a few seconds later, we again saw at the end of the road a sideways car blocking both lanes. I stopped the car and I looked over at my friends. We were all looking at each other, clueless of what to do. It was too dark and we couldn't tell if anyone was in the car up ahead, so we didn't want to approach it. As we were discussing our options, two men came up from one of the houses off the street. One of them stood behind the car, and the other one came up to my window. He signaled with his hands for me to roll down the window, and nervously, I rolled it down just a few inches. The man looked at each of us and scanned the inside of the car, then asked me where we were headed. "Just back to the highway," I said. He nodded and looked over at his friend, who started to walk over to the passenger side. There was a small moment where it felt like everything went silent and nobody moved. Then suddenly, both men grabbed the doors, trying to open them repeatedly. I reacted as fast as I could, putting the car in reverse as everyone was screaming. Just as I started to back out, the man tried to stick his arm through the gap in the window and even got stuck for a second as I pulled the car back before slamming to the ground. I turned around and floored it out of the street and went back to the way we came. We were all in total shock. I tried to stay calm, but I was shaking uncontrollably. We all agreed we would go back to the same way we came and just get on the highway from there. I think we were all pretty shaken by the situation, but I do think that I handled it pretty well. Luckily, our doors were locked though, because I'm not sure if I'd be here right now if they weren't.
My name is Erica, and I live in Tennessee. I grew up in a smallish town that, even though I love, it has started to become more dangerous over time. I actually have two terrifying incidents. The first one was when I was about 15 or 16. I was starting to take my usual walk, and right as I walked outside the gate to my house, I had noticed this man who was maybe in his mid-40s in a car, and he stuck his head out the window, and he was just staring at me while driving down the road opposite of where I was walking. I continued to walk, and I got onto the street behind my house, and then the same man had turned around at some point, and he found me walking again, and asked if I needed a ride. I said I was fine, but he just kept persisting. I said that I'm just taking a walk, and that I'm fine, and he finally slowly drove off. As I kept walking, he had turned around a couple of more times or so, just to slowly drive beside me and stare. The last time he came back, he started making kissy faces at me, and he said I had a cute ass. At this point, I got really angry, and I told him I didn't care and to go. He finally slowly drove off, and as soon as I saw him disappear, I booked it. I was crying and shaking, and then stopped running because I realized I was halfway in between my house and a friend's house, and I didn't know if I should risk going home and having him see me or run to my friend's house from the back way and have him take me home. I finally chose to just rush home, and I made it inside. The second incident was a closer call, I think, but for some reason, it didn't scare me as badly. I was taking a walk, and I was right across the street, and a caddy cornered me from my house. When I was about to cross the street, there was a typical white van that was driving up, and they had their left turn signal on to signal that they were turning down that road, so that I could cross the street, I guess. So as soon as I crossed the street, instead of them turning, they immediately pulled up beside me, and the man on the passenger side opened the door and got up, but then immediately sat back down when he noticed I saw what he was doing. So to make sure they didn't realize it was my house that we were right in front of, I just kept walking instead of going inside, which made my heart sink because I was getting further away from my house, which would have made me feel safer, but I couldn't risk them knowing where I lived, so I kept walking. but I then hid behind a bush and just waited for them to drive off. After about a minute roughly, they finally drove off, but not down the street they were originally going to. I then came out from behind the bush and ran inside my house. The main thing I kick myself for every time is not getting the license plate number or reporting it. Who knows if they did something to anyone else? Always keep some type of protection on you, like a gun, or at least the pepper spray. And please be safe.